Well, hello there again, everybody. Boyd here with you, and welcome to the grand finale of our 1/350 scale RMS Lusitania build. I've been working really hard on this model the last couple days and got it all finished up. We're going to show you what we came up with here in just a second, but here's a last look at the original box art. Again, going back to what I talked about at the beginning of the video build series. This is the ANMARK kit, which was put out in 1982. It originally came out from a company in Britain called N-Tech. And then it was passed on to ANMARK, and then ANMARK went out of business in the mid-80s, and then it went on to Revell, and then currently Hobby Boss now has the mold, which is a Japanese company, and that's the most likely kit that you'll find if you look around for one of these, which the kit is identical all the way through the production run, so don't worry about anything being different about the model. The only thing different that you get on the latest release is the base, as I mentioned, is kind of a plain black plastic base. But you can always make a better base for it, but the ship model itself is exactly the same. And after having built this kit, I'm really happy with it for being a vintage kit. It turned out really nice. It's got a lot of great parts detail on it, high parts count. And after you finish up building the model, you put on all the rigging and everything, and then of course we did the extra thing with the lighting and all that. It really turns out quite nice, so I'm really happy with it. So we'll take the box out of the way now and show you the model itself. The model turned out really nice. It was challenging in quite a few ways. It had a few warped parts and little things like that, flash and things like that. And there's just so many little tiny parts that have to go on, and so much detail painting that you have to do. It's kind of time consuming, but it's really worth it in the end. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Like I said, I've been a big fascinated with the ocean liner, the steam-powered ocean liners from around the early 1900s until, probably around 1950 or so. They were just all beautiful. The one more kind of big liner kit that I would like to get would be the SS United States. That's an amazing ship. It didn't have a really dramatic history, but it was just a technological marvel. It still exists. It's sitting in Philadelphia right now. Some of you out there that are liner fans will probably know what I'm talking about, but it's in a sad state right now. Hopefully somebody will get a hold of that one and restore it, because it's kind of one of the last of its kind from the Queen Mary era, and it's just a gorgeous ship in its own right, and it was incredibly fast and just a beautiful, well-proportioned ship. So look up the SS United States on YouTube if you haven't heard of it, and you'll see what I mean. It's a gorgeous ship. You'll be sad to see the state that it's sitting in currently, but at least it still exists and they haven't scrapped it yet. But getting back to the Lusitania, had a lot of fun on this. Like I said, I'm going to take the camera off the tripod here in just a second, and we'll move in a little bit closer. But in the beginning here, I just want to talk a little bit more about the history of the Lusitania. Most people know that it's kind of famous for having been sunk in World War I. On May 7th, 1915, just after lunchtime, it was cruising on its way back to England from having left from New York City. It was just about back home. It was just rounding the southern tip of Ireland. They call it the Old Head of Kinsale. It's a kind of a famous landmark in Ireland. There's one of the oldest standing lighthouses on that peninsula there in all of Europe that still exists to this day, so you can still see the exact spot. But just as it was coming around that southern tip of Ireland on its way into Liverpool, England, a German submarine, U-20, commanded by Captain Walter Schwieger. They spotted the Lusitania coming towards them and fired one torpedo. It hit it basically right here just behind the bridge, from all historical accounts just below the waterline, and big explosion, and then a couple seconds later another huge explosion, and historians have been trying to solve that mystery for years. There's a lot of controversy about the Lusitania, whether or not it was carrying war munitions, whether it was carrying explosives to help out the English, because the English were having a lot of trouble getting supplies in World War I. And so a lot thought that the United States was helping out by sending, war arms and things like that, and they were hiding some of it on passenger ships, which obviously would be very controversial if that ever came out. But many researches have been done, dives on the ship over the years, trying to solve the mystery, but the ship is just in such horrible condition. It's basically completely collapsed and almost flat, and they really can't find much whenever they look at it. It's covered in fishing nets. Not a very pretty sight, not at all compared to how beautiful it was when it was still afloat, as you can see here. But a little bit more history about the Lusitania. It was one of the fastest ships in the world at the time, along with its sister ship, The Mauritania, both of those ships were built in the early 1900s. Lusitania first set sail in 1907, and I believe Mauritania was a year later in 1908. Could be wrong about that, but I think I'm pretty close. But anyway, both of those ships were really fast. As I mentioned, they used steam turbine engines instead of reciprocating steam engines. So they were really powerful and really fast. They both held the blue ribbon, which is the speed record at the time for the fastest crossings of the Atlantic. They kind of traded that ribbon back and forth over the years. And so they were really fast, and they were considered really reliable, very luxurious. About 100 feet shorter than the Titanic. Lusitania was around 88 feet wide and around 790 feet long. And Titanic was, 90 feet wide and 890 feet long, so about a 100-foot difference. But anyway, just a really beautiful ship in its own right. And as I built this model, I became more and more fascinated by the bright colors and the kind of the different overall design that the Lusitania and Cunard, the John Brown Shipping Company, built this ship for the Cunard line. And they chose some interesting design features and colors, and kind of gave them a kind of really bright, festive look, like I kind of mentioned in the opening video, and compared to the White Star line, which is more conservative. It was just a ship that must have really stood out when it was first launched. Now, I built this as it appeared in its early career. Shortly after it was launched, it had the International Orange smokestacks and the brown tones on the upper boat decks and things like that. It changed color scheme several times over the years, all the way up until the point where, as it was sunk in 1915, the funnels were painted black, and this white shear line here kind of extended all the way forward, and then there was a kind of a off-yellow shear line that was painted all the way around the between the hull and the upper superstructure, so it looked quite a bit different at the time of its sinking. Most people, historians, think that it was kind of an effort by Cunard to disguise the ship so that they couldn't tell some of the liners apart, which may or may not have helped, because Mauritania, the Lusitania's sister ship during the time of the war, it was actually confiscated by the British Admiralty and was being used as an auxiliary cruiser. It was an armed cruiser, basically, during the war. It had some guns put on it. And, the Germans could have, I guess, rightfully said that they mistook the Lusitania for the Mauritania, and that's why they fired at it. None of that information was really gone into in a lot of detail, but, kind of an interesting theory to think about, because it would have been considered more of a legitimate target. But the Lusitania and the Mauritania are almost identical. The only way that you can really tell them apart is that Lusitania has these earlier manhole covers for its ventilation system. When I get a little closer to the model in a second, you'll see it in more detail, but they were kind of a lid that opens up, and they could crank them up to almost, completely vertical or whatever. And it was known for not working very well. The passengers often complained about not having very good ventilation on the ship, especially if it was stationary or moving at slow speeds. And so the Mauritania has updated these kind of periscope-looking air intakes, if you want to call them that, called cowl vents, which were much more effective at grabbing the air and bringing it down inside the ship. Incidentally, historians are now saying that actually might have been part of the reason why the Lusitania sank so fast. It sank in only 20 minutes, which is amazing for a ship that size. Even with a torpedo hole, with all of its watertight compartments and everything, it must have been taking in a tremendous amount of water. And they're thinking that, and you can see in a lot of the photographs and film footage that still exists of the Lusitania, most of the time when you see it, all the portholes are open. And it's because passengers weren't getting a lot of air down on the bottom, and so they were trying to get their own air through the portholes, and they're thinking that probably a lot of those portholes were open when it took the torpedo, and when it rolled over on its starboard side, tons of water came in, and having lots of open portholes is going to accelerate the flooding and bypass all the watertight doors and all that stuff. Not to mention that electrical power failed on the ship right after the torpedo hit, so the watertight doors might not necessarily have deployed like they should have, and they might have had a lot of open compartments. But the ship is laying now at the bottom of the Atlantic there, about 300 feet below the water, right off the tip of Southern Ireland. Like I said, about 11 miles off the coast. And you can watch lots of YouTube videos about it. There's one I'd recommend called Last Voyage of the Lusitania. That's done by Dr. Ballard, the same person who discovered the Titanic in 1985. Really well done documentary. So you can check that out for a lot more information about the Lusitania. But let's pause really quick, and I'll take the camera off the tripod, and we'll get a little closer to the model, and we'll turn the lights on, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I did to get this all finished up. So we'll be right back with that. Okay, everybody, well, here's our Lusitania all lit up, and I'll get you in closer here for a look at all the work we put into it. I'm going to start off here at the back, and you can see that we left off in that last video where we finished up. I talked about I was going to work on the after deck here, so I got all that upper and lower decking done on that and installed on the model. I did the same exact process that I used, that I showed you guys in part 2 of our where we hollowed out all the inner, the inner part of the center part of the deck so that the light would come up all the way from the bottom to the top. And I'll just kind of get you down low here and take you along, and you can see we got all the windows inside those, the cladding there on the sides, the recessed deck walls that you can see are all lit up, little cabins in there. And then all the lighting up on the top. We had a couple more skylights here that went up on the back. And we had the stern docking bridge, and of course we have the main masts on it now, front and rear, and all the small little details have been done on the upper decks. There were hundreds of pieces that go on there, small little steam winches and ventilators and all kinds of cool little stuff, bollards and tie downs and stairwells and hand railings and all that. Now on this kit I used most of the kit supplied handrails. You can see I used those all on the upper decks here around the boat deck and all that. They don't look too bad. Unfortunately, they're kind of the detail of the ribbing is only molded on the the outboard side, so on the inboard side there's not a lot you can do with it. But I thought about going out and buying the full photo etch set for this, but both sites that I checked, which were Tom's Models and Gold Medal Models, are the only companies that makes a photo etch set for this. They were both out of stock, back ordered, so I didn't want to wait forever to get that. And I kind of wanted to build this kit, a lot out of the box, because I just think it's really cool to build, vintage models sometimes and leave them alone and just build them as they are. And I still think it looks pretty good. I did a little bit of a wash, you can see, to just kind of make the detail on those, pop out a little bit, make them look a little bit better. They are what they are, but, I don't think they look too bad. But down here at the fan tail, you can see I actually did use some photo etch railing, and the same thing here up at the bow. If you can see that, I had some scrap photo etch railing left over in 1/350 scale from another ship that I built a while back, and just went ahead and used that. So that worked out pretty good. So we did spruce it up a little bit, but just kind of going around here and showing you the detail on the foredeck and everything. All the small little parts have been put in there now, and got the auxiliary anchor crane, and most of the time I spent on the upper decks here was doing all this rigging. And I'm going to talk to you about that really quick. I used a really cool method that I saw on YouTube. I didn't actually see the method for doing rigging, but I saw this product, and I thought, hey, I wonder if this would work for doing this type of thing, and also along with the photo etch. And I'll just kind of give you a look at it right here. This is what they call UV glue. A lot of you guys out there that model are probably already using this stuff, but I thought I'd give it a try. Most of the time with the rigging I would use CA glue, and or on photo etch, to help it set, and it seems to stick to brass, and it seems to stick to the threads pretty well. So I didn't know how well it was going to work. The main issue that I always had with CA is sometimes it'll set too fast. So if you're trying to place delicate little parts, especially railings and stuff like that, you have to move them around a little bit before you want it, before you want it to dry, actually. And sometimes it dries too fast, and you got to pull the part back off there, and you can wind up making a mess sometimes. But what I really like about this stuff is it's got about the same viscosity as a gel type, medium gel type CA glue, but it doesn't dry at all unless you hit it with the UV light. Now it comes with this detachable little light here, and you can see it's got like a little thumb switch on it. You turn it on, you get your UV light coming out of it. And what I did is I basically dispensed a little bit of this stuff out of here in a little puddle, and then I would just take all the easy line, which is what I use for all the rigging on the ship. I'll give you a better look at it in a second. But I would just take my tweezers and grab a hold of it and dip the tip of that in my little puddle here, and then put it up on the model, and then just with one hand hold that in place, and then in the other hand go up to it like this and shine the UV light at it. Wait for about 5 to 10 seconds and let go, and it would be on there solid as a rock. Goes on pretty clean. I'm really happy with how it worked. It seems to hold and be pretty strong. It's kind of a resin-based material, so it's really tough, and you can sand it and you can paint it and all that. They claim you can even make shapes with it and stuff like that. So, but you can see I just spent several hours going over all of the the entire ship here with all this rigging. You can see we've got each funnel has 16 guy wires that come on the port and starboard side. On each side it has 2 rows. It's interesting too that witnesses claim when they saw the Lusitania sink that the funnels never came off, and I can see why. They were on there like really strong. They had tons of bracing on those, whereas everybody knows when the Titanic went down, basically all the funnels cracked off as it was going underneath of the water. Witnesses saw the funnels fall off. So the ones on the Lusitania were obviously pretty strong. But we've got all the rigging up on the masts and the foremast and the aftermast and the rat lines and all that. Got the Cunard symbol there, their flag, which is the lion, and then here the British flag, and then the American flag up here at the foremast, which you'd see oftentimes when they were. They didn't display all these flags at sea. There's people don't realize that there are certain reasons when they, or certain times when they display the flags, when they're in port or certain other things. But when they're at sea and cruising, they don't normally display the flags, just like on military ships. Until they go into battle or whatever, or they're signaling other ships, they use flags to signal. But kind of getting off subject a little bit, but just give you a little bit more look here at the closer details. And here you can see those manhole covers, the open covers on the upper boat decks here. They're kind of cool looking. I dressed these up a little bit. They're not, they weren't originally brass colored like that. They were all just painted brown. And I just thought it would make them pop a little bit if I gave them that kind of brass look. And I'm doing sort of what they call an admiral's model of this ship with the gold anchor and gold propellers and the gold auxiliary anchor here at the foredeck and all that, just to make it look more like a museum model and everything. As I said again, I'm really fascinated by the interesting color choices that they used on this ship. The bright orange funnels, they've got kind of a the color callouts called for an orange or a pale yellow here at the crow's nest, and the brown details up here on the deck. It really must have looked really beautiful, like I said, at the time, and I wish I could have been around to see these ships when they were all brand new. I'm just, like I said, really fascinated by them. But down here you can see at the stern, the Lusitania early in her career had these really beautiful brass accent bars that kind of went around and wrapped around the stern of the ship, and the detail of that is really not there on this kit. So that's just some fiber optic that I found, looked through, that I had here, that I kind of played around with until I got the right diameter, which I thought was mostly, looked in scale, and I just glued that on and wrapped that all the way around, the back end of the ship like that, and then painted it with some gold accent paint, and I think it turned out pretty good. But you can see we got our little propellers on there. The little decals are now in place here for the, to tell you the draft of the ship, how deep it sits in the water. If I can get close enough here, you might be able to see the little numbers that are on the bow there. I'm not sure if they're getting blurry or not, but just some of that going on. And up here around the deck we got all the lifeboats in place, and the hand railings and all that, like I mentioned. The skylights all lit up, and just, again, like I said, I had a lot of fun working on this, and I'm just really happy to have this ship finally. I've always been fascinated by this ship and the Titanic and several of the other steamships of that era. Like I said, I hopefully will be able to build a few more of them. I've actually got a small Revell Queen Mary kit that I'm going to do something with a little bit later. Not necessarily built as the Queen Mary. If you guys know, the Queen Mary is substituted for a couple of other ships in certain movies, and that might be a little hint for a future build here if you guys know what I'm talking about, but we'll come back with that at a later time. But so this is our RMS Lusitania. I just want to say thanks for everybody for following along, all the positive comments about this. Really appreciate it. I'm glad to see a lot of people are interested in these older ships and something a little different. We're going to get back to our normal stuff around here. We've got some sci-fi stuff coming up. We've got I've got the Klingon Bird of Prey kit, or the Klingon Katinga, I should say, the 1350, and I've got all the parts in for that now to start working on it. I'm going to be using the aftermarket photo etch set on it, and the weapons light up system from Titanic Controls, and a few other things. The masking set for it and all that, so you guys can check that build out here on the channel coming up really soon. That's going to be the one we start on next, I believe. So I hope you enjoyed the 1/350 scale Lusitania. It was a lot of fun, and I'm going to wrap this up by fading out one more time, and we're going to bring out an older ship model that I built probably about 20 years ago that I don't think you guys have ever seen, and have it sit here side by side and compare it to the Lusitania, and we'll close up with that. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody, back with you one more time, and what I have to show you here is a look at my Titanic model that I built about 15 to 20 years ago, I think now. This is the old Minicraft 1/570 scale RMS Titanic kit, and I originally built this model, and I did have some lighting in it, but unfortunately it doesn't work anymore. Back in the day, guys, I used an incandescent bulb, a regular tubular shaped bulb that ran on 110, believe it or not. Kind of a long tube-shaped bulb, sort of like a curio cabinet bulb that sits in a little sort of T-shaped bracket down on the very bottom of the hull, and that eventually burned out. I lit it too much over the years, and you know, those kind of bulbs only have a certain lifespan. But the model itself I still really think looks good. I put a lot of work into it, like you could see, and I was still learning a lot about building models back then, so I was really pleased how it turned out, because I was really worried about doing all the rigging and everything. I had never... That was the very first time I had ever done rigging like that, and I just, and in those days there weren't YouTube videos to follow or anything like that. I read some modeling magazines, believe it or not. Who reads magazines anymore, right? But back then I read magazines and saw pictures and read articles, talked to people at model shows, and this was actually one of the only kits I built probably between the time I was 30 years old and by the time I hit 50, and I didn't have a lot of time for modeling, and as I said, I've told you guys before, it's only been about maybe 8 years now or 9 years that I got back into modeling. I'd been away from it for a long time, but so there's the Titanic. Now the interesting thing you can see is that they look almost identical in size here, as you can see, guys. They're almost exactly the same length. They look very similar, but keep in mind the Lusitania is a 1/350 scale, and this Titanic is 1/570, so you've got a whole 1/30 scale that the Titanic needs to come up in size, so that's like half again the size almost of the Lusitania. So you can see how much, you can kind of imagine how much bigger the Titanic would have been in reality over the Lusitania. And hopefully later this year I'll get the 1/200 scale Titanic kit, and we'll build that up, and we can really show you some cool up close detail on that, because that model just looks fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on that one. But there you go, guys. There's the two ships side by side. Just give you kind of a neat little pan around to these two beauties. As I said, I wish I could have been around back in the day to see these things and actually take a ride on them. I would have loved that. And I know a lot of people out there are fascinated by these ships. So there you go, guys. There's the Lusitania and the Titanic. So we're going to come back here in about a week or two and get started on the Klingon bird of prey, guys. So I hope you tune in and check that out. Just want to say a couple of quick shout outs here at the end too. I want to say a shout out to Frankie Day Models. Frankie Day has a YouTube channel, and his build of the Lusitania is as well as several other ship models that he's done on his channel is kind of what inspired me to work on this one, and he actually dropped a comment on the video about seeing that we were building it and liked what he saw. So I really appreciate that, Frankie, and we follow your channel as well. If you get a chance, guys, check out Frankie's channel. He builds lots of different kinds of models. He's got a wide interest in models. He'll build anything from ships to, planes, cars, you name it. So tune in Frankie's channel and check him out. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate all you subscribers. We'll see you again in a week or so. Until then, take care and happy modeling, everyone.
When the Lusitania went